A millionaire is brutally kidnapped as he leaves his company and abandoned in a dangerous alley with torn clothes, injured and trembling from the cold. Then an 8-year-old homeless girl who slept in cardboard boxes approaches and does something unbelievable. She takes off her only coat, literally all she owns against the cold, and offers it to him, whispering, "You can have my coat, mister." He is moved, but what the girl asks next makes his heart race with fear. The chilly Thursday air cut through the concrete canyons of Midtown Manhattan like invisible blades as David Sterling exited the corporate high-rise, adjusting the cashmere overcoat across his broad shoulders. At 52, he had built an empire. Few could imagine. But on that freezing night, something different weighed on his chest. The meeting had stretched longer than planned, and the streets of New York seemed more deserted than usual for that hour. David had always trusted the people around him too much. It was a trait his late wife, Eleanor, used to call dangerous generosity. He believed genuine kindness existed in everyone, even when facts suggested otherwise. This emotional vulnerability remained hidden behind a facade of impeccable corporate control. But those who knew him closely understood his heart was bigger than his bank account. His steps echoed solitarily on the wet asphalt when 3 figures emerged from the shadows between 2 parked cars. David's instinct should have blared alarms, but his mind was occupied with numbers, contracts, and the persistent feeling that something wasn't right within his company. He had a dangerous tendency to underestimate real threats, always focusing on the positive aspects of situations. "David Sterling?" A husky voice sliced through the silence like an axe. Before he could answer or react, strong hands shoved him toward a dark van. The smell of rusted metal invaded his nostrils as the side door creaked open ominously. His heart pounded, but his mind was still processing the impossibility of the situation. Things like this didn't happen to people like him, not in a reputable business district. "Get in the van, now!" The order came with a more violent shove. The sound of distant sirens composed a soundtrack of urban dread that seemed ripped straight from his worst nightmares. David tried to scream, but his throat was as dry as parchment. His hands trembled as he was forced into the vehicle, and the door slammed shut with a definitive thud that sounded like the closing of a chapter in his life. For hours that felt like an eternity, he remained blindfolded in the back of the van, hearing fragments of conversations that didn't make complete sense. The kidnappers spoke of teaching him a lesson and showing him who's boss. But David couldn't connect their words to any enemy he might have made. His corporate mind tried to analyze the situation logically, but primitive fear had taken over his rational thoughts. The psychological intimidation was meticulous and cruel. They didn't physically harm him severely, but every word whispered in his ear was calculated to break his confidence and plant seeds of lasting terror. David, accustomed to being in control of every situation, felt utterly helpless for the first time in decades. When they finally pulled him from the van, his clothes were torn, and he had suffered some superficial injuries on his wrists where the ropes had marked his skin. The abandonment happened in a dark alley in a neighborhood he didn't even recognize, far from everything he knew and considered safe. Completely disoriented, David stumbled among piles of trash and graffitied walls. The cold seeped into his bones. Through his damaged clothes, and the shock of what he had endured left him in an almost catatonic state. Trembling uncontrollably, he tripped over a pothole in the uneven sidewalk and fell heavily to his knees, feeling a sharp pain shoot through his legs. It was then that he heard a soft rustle coming from stacked cardboard boxes against a nearby wall. His heart, still racing from the recent trauma, made him flinch, fearing his captors had returned to finish what they had started. But what emerged from the boxes was not an additional threat. It was a girl. The child who emerged from the cardboard boxes couldn't have been more than 8 years old. with disheveled brown hair and clothes that had once been many colors, now faded by time and neglect. Her large, expressive eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and caution as she watched the man fallen on the cold alley ground. David remained motionless, still processing the reality of his situation. The girl approached slowly, like a wild animal, assessing whether this stranger posed danger or needed help. She had learned to read people during her months living on the streets, and something about this elegant man, even with his torn clothes, told her he was genuinely in trouble. "Mister, are you hurt?" she asked in a soft but firm voice. There was a premature maturity in her words that contrasted with her apparent age. David looked up, trying to focus through the haze of shock that still clouded his thoughts. The sight of that small child, clearly homeless, concerned about his well-being, a complete stranger, hit him like a gut punch. For a moment, he completely forgot his own suffering. I think so," he managed to murmur, his voice hoarse from the traumatic experience. "I don't know where I am." The girl nodded with understanding, as if she knew well the sensation of being lost and disoriented. She looked up and down the dark street, assessing potential dangers that might be lurking in the shadows. Her survival instincts, sharpened by months of precarious living, warned her to always be vigilant. "It's really cold tonight," she said, more to herself than to him. "Colder than yesterday." It was then that she did something David would never forget for the rest of his life. Without hesitation, the girl began to take off her only jacket, a worn but visibly clean hoodie that represented literally everything she possessed against the biting cold of that Thursday night. It was a piece she had hand-washed in some public restroom, carefully preserved because it was her only protection against the elements. "You can have my jacket, mister," she whispered, extending the garment toward him. David froze. The generosity of that gesture was so impossible, so contrary to everything logic and life experience told him about human nature, that for a moment he thought he was hallucinating. A child who clearly had nothing, offering her only material, possession to a complete stranger. "No, I can't accept that," he stammered, trying to get up. "You need it more than I do." But the girl insisted, coming closer and practically forcing the jacket into his trembling hands. "You're shaking much, more than I am, and I know places around here to get warm." The texture of the fabric in his hands was surprisingly soft, and David could feel the residual warmth of her body still lingering in the garment. That jacket had been worn with care, preserved with a carefulness that only someone who possesses very little can have for their sole possessions. "Why would you do that?" he asked, still dazed by the kidnapping experience and now completely destabilized by the unexpected kindness. "You don't even know me." The girl tilted her head to the side, as if the question was strange. "Sometimes people need help, that's all." But then she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as if remembering something important. The expression on her face shifted from gentle concern to something more serious, almost wary. "Mister," she said, hesitantly, "is your name David by any chance?" The world stopped. The cold, the shock, even the pain in his bruised wrists, everything vanished for a moment as David processed that impossible question. How could a street child, who had clearly found him by chance in that abandoned alley, know his name? "How do you—" he began, but the words died in his dry throat. The girl took a step back, her posture becoming more defensive, as if she suddenly realized she had revealed something she shouldn't have. The silence that followed the girl's question was deafening. David felt as if the world had stopped spinning, leaving only him and that mysterious child in a universe suspended in time. The possibility that his kidnapping had not been a random crime began to take shape in his mind like a menacing shadow. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Her jacket was still in his hands, but now it seemed to weigh tons. The girl bit her lower lip, clearly debating internally whether or not to reveal what she knew. Her large eyes moved nervously between David and the alley shadows, as if fearing someone might be watching. I shouldn't have said anything, she murmured, taking another step back toward her cardboard boxes. Please, David got up unsteadily, still wrapped in the jacket she had given him. I need to know what happened to me tonight. It wasn't normal. If you know anything at all, please tell me. The urgency in his voice must have touched something in the child, because she stopped retreating. For a long moment, she studied him with those eyes that had seen far more than any 8-year-old should see. I was hiding, she said finally, her voice almost inaudible. Last night, very late, there were some men talking near here, near where I sometimes sleep. David felt his stomach clench. What men? Big men, with scary voices. They didn't see me because I know how to hide well. There was a subtle pride in her voice when mentioning her survival skills. But I heard them talking about you. What did they say? The question came out more desperate than David intended. The girl looked around again, making sure they were truly alone. One of them said, "Tonight, we'll get David Sterling, and he's going to learn not to mess with the wrong people." The words hit David like a lightning bolt. There was no longer any doubt. His kidnapping had been planned, specifically targeted at him. Someone wanted him to learn a lesson. But who? And about what? Are you sure they said my name? David Sterling, he insisted, part of him still hoping it was a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure. She nodded seriously, because David Sterling sounds like a strong name, and I thought, I hope that David Sterling can get away from the bad men. The innocence with which she said it, as if she had rooted for a stranger simply because he had a good name, deeply touched David's heart. But at the same time, a cold paranoia began to infiltrate his thoughts. If the kidnapping had been planned, it meant someone close to him, someone who knew his schedule and movements, had provided information to the criminals. Did you see what these men looked like? Could you recognize them? He asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The girl nodded. One of them had a scar here. She ran her finger across her own cheek, and another one was really tall, with a black leather coat. David memorized every detail she provided, his corporate mind already beginning to organize information and seek connections. But a sense of vulnerability he had never experienced invaded him. If people close to him were involved, whom could he trust? What's your name? He asked, realizing he still didn't know the name of his savior. Sophia, she answered simply. Sophia Maria, but everyone just calls me Sophia. Sophia, he repeated, the name sounding sweet in his voice. You saved my life tonight. Not just by giving me your jacket, but by telling me what you heard. Sophia shrugged, as if saving people's lives was something she did regularly. I just told the truth. My mom always said the truth is important, even when it hurts. The mention of her mother in the past tense didn't go unnoticed by David, but he decided not to press. There were other, more urgent matters to resolve. Sophia, you're in danger now, he said seriously. If those men find out you heard them. I know how to hide, she interrupted confidently. I've been hiding for a long time. But David knew that hiding wouldn't be enough if powerful people were involved. And for the first time in years, he felt completely lost about what to do. Dawn was beginning to break when Sophia made a decision that surprised even herself. Looking at David, who remained trembling even with her jacket on, she realized that this man needed a safe place to recover and think. Mr. Sterling, she said hesitantly, you can't stay out here on the street. The bad men might come back. David nodded, knowing she was right but unsure where to go. His home was on the other side of the city, and he wasn't sure it would be safe to return there. Moreover, he had no money, no documents, no phone. Everything had been taken during the kidnapping. "I have a place," Sophia continued, her voice gaining determination. "It's not much, but it's safe. No one's found me there yet." She began to walk, expecting him to follow. David hesitated for a moment. Following an 8-year-old to an unknown location didn't seem like the most sensible decision, but considering his current situation, few options seemed sensible. They walked through deserted streets for about 20 minutes, Sophia navigating with the confidence of someone who knew every alley and shortcut in that part of the city. She guided him through a vacant lot, then under a broken fence, until they reached an old highway overpass, crossing a nearly dry creek. "It's down here," she said, pointing to a space beneath the structure of the overpass. What David saw simultaneously impressed and moved him. Sophia had created a true miniature home in that makeshift space. There was a small but clean mattress, covered by a faded sheet that was clearly washed regularly. Wooden crates served as shelves and a table, organized with a neatness that revealed the care with which she treated her small territory. But what caught his eye most was an entire wall covered with newspaper and magazine clippings. David approached to examine them more closely and discovered something that made him swallow hard. "These are," he began, "news about rich people who help kids," Sophia completed with a shy smile. "I collect them." The articles were carefully cut out and glued to the concrete wall. "Businessman builds school in underserved community. Millionaire donates fortune to orphanages. Wealthy entrepreneur adopts 10 homeless children." Each clipping was perfectly aligned, creating a mosaic of hope and dreams. "Why do you collect these?" David asked, touched by the discovery. Sophia sat on the mattress, hugging her knees. "Because I dream of finding a kind, rich person who can help me," she said with the brutal honesty only children possess. "Someone who likes kids and wants to do good." The irony of the situation was not lost on David. Here he was, exactly the kind of person Sophia dreamed of finding, and she had just saved him without knowing who he really was. "What if you found that person?" he asked, sitting cautiously on one of the crates. "I'd help them too," Sophia responded immediately, "because good people deserve help from good people. That's how it works." David ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "Sophia, do you have any idea how brave you are, what you did for me?" She shrugged. "Anyone would do that." "No," he said firmly. "They wouldn't. Most people would have pretended they didn't see me, or would have been afraid to get involved." Sophia considered this for a moment. Maybe people are scared because they don't know that doing good makes you stronger, not weaker. The depth of that observation, coming from a child who had lost everything but still held faith in human kindness, hit David like a punch to the chest. He thought of his privileged life, how he had become paranoid and distrustful after just one terrible night, while Sophia maintained her generosity after months of hardship. "Sophia," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I want you to know that there are good people in the world, people who care." "I know," she smiled. "You're one of them." At that moment, under an abandoned highway overpass, surrounded by newspaper clippings that told stories of hope, David made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He didn't know how yet, but he silently vowed he would protect this extraordinary girl, no matter what. The next morning, David knew he needed to return to his company, even at risk. There was urgent business to resolve, and his sudden absence had certainly been noticed. Sophia had insisted on lending him a clean shirt she'd found at a charity thrift store. Too big for her, but it fit him perfectly under his torn blazer. "Mr. Sterling, are you sure it's safe to go back?" she asked, adjusting the collar of his shirt with the care of a daughter looking after her father. "I'm not sure of anything anymore," he admitted, "but I need to find out who did this to me. And with you helping me identify the kidnappers, maybe I can get to the culprits." When David arrived at the corporate building, using the back entrance to avoid questions about his disheveled appearance, the reception from his employees was strange. "Mr. Sterling," exclaimed Marcia, his secretary of 15 years, rising abruptly from her desk. "It's good you're back. We were worried." There was something forced in her expression of relief. David knew Marcia well enough to tell when she was nervous, and there was definitely nervousness in her eyes. "Worried about what exactly?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Well, when you didn't arrive this morning at the usual time and then didn't answer calls." She hesitated, her hands nervously fidgeting with papers on the desk. "Mr. Thorne was quite restless." Michael Thorne was his partner for 23 years, since the company's beginnings. If there was anyone David trusted absolutely, it was him. Or at least it had been until that morning, when the paranoia planted by the kidnapping began to color all his perceptions. "Michael got in early today?" David asked. "Yes, very early. He's been in his office since 6 in the morning making calls." Marcia stopped abruptly, as if realizing she had said too much. "Work calls, of course." David nodded slowly. Michael never arrived before 9 in the morning. It was a decades-long habit. "What kind of work calls at 6 in the morning, Marcia?" I don't know." He requested privacy. The secretary now completely avoided his gaze. Walking through the familiar corridors of his own company, David felt like a stranger observing his life from the outside. Every employee who greeted him seemed to be playing a role, their smiles slightly forced, their "glad you're okay" expressions sounding rehearsed. When he finally reached Michael's office, he found his partner on the phone, speaking in a low voice. Upon seeing David, Michael visibly paled before composing himself. "I have to go. We'll talk later," he said quickly into the phone, ending the call. "David, what a scare you gave us. Where have you been?" "I had some personal issues," David answered vaguely, observing every micro-expression on his 2-decade friend's face. "Issues that made me think about a lot of things." "What kind of issues?" Michael got up, rounding the desk to approach him. "Are you all right? You look different." "I'm fine," David lied. "But tell me, Michael, you made calls very early today. To whom?" The question caught Michael off guard. For a fraction of a second, his mask of friendly concern slipped, revealing something that could have been guilt or nervousness. "Routine calls. You know how business is. Always international clients, different time zones." The explanation came too quickly, too prepared. "International clients at 6 in the morning on a Friday?" David pressed. "Which clients would those be?" Michael hesitated a fraction of a second longer than he should have. "The representatives from the German company. You know that negotiation we were conducting?" But David knew there was no negotiation with a German company underway. They had closed that project 3 months ago. "Of course," he said slowly. "The German company." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tensions. David realized that his best friend and partner had just lied to him, without even batting an eye. And for the first time in 23 years of partnership, David wondered if he truly knew Michael Thorne. David spent the rest of the day discreetly observing the behavior of everyone around him, every conversation interrupted when he approached, every look exchanged between employees that seemed laden with hidden meanings. Paranoia grew like a weed in his chest, but he knew he couldn't ignore the signs. At night, he decided to return to Sophia's hideout. It was the only place where he felt truly safe, the only place where he knew he could completely trust someone. The irony was not lost on him. A millionaire finding security under an overpass with a street girl. "How was your day, Mr. Sterling?" Sophia asked as soon as he arrived, immediately noticing his tense expression. "Confusing," he admitted, sitting. On the crate he now considered his spot. "I think you were right about the men you overheard. It seems people I trusted might be involved." Sophia nodded seriously, as if unsurprised by adult malice. "Sometimes people pretend to be good when they're not. My mom taught me to pay attention to people's eyes, not just their words." "Your mother was wise," David said gently. "Do you want to talk about her?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with an impressive strength for her age. "She died 6 months ago, a sickness the doctors couldn't cure because we didn't have money for the expensive medicine." David felt a tightening in his chest. "And your father?" "Never met him. My mom said he was a good man, but he had to leave before I was born." Sophia wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "After my mom died, there was no one left. People from Child Protective Services came, but I ran away. I was afraid of being separated from my mom's last things." She pointed to a corner of the hideout where there was a small shoebox. "Those are the only photos I have of her, and a necklace that was my grandmother's." David looked at that extraordinary girl who had lost everything but still found the strength to help a stranger. "Sophia, I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. No matter what happens, I will take care of you." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. But first we need to take care of you," she said with determination. "You said you need to find out who the bad men are. I can help." "How?" Sophia got up and went to another corner of her hideout, from where she took out a small, worn notebook. "I write down everything I see and hear. My mom taught me that information is power, and that people like us always need to be aware." She opened the notebook, revealing pages covered with childish but clear and organized handwriting. "Here's everything about that night. The men, what they said, what they looked like." David took the notebook with reverence. Sophia's notes were detailed and precise. Times, physical descriptions, fragments of conversations. It was better than many professional reports he had received. "Sophia, this is incredible," he said, genuinely impressed. "You are very intelligent." "My mom said intelligence is useless if you don't use it to help others," she replied. "And there's one more thing." Sophia turned a few pages of the notebook until she reached a drawing. It was a simple but recognizable sketch of a corporate building. After the men finished talking, I followed one of them from a distance so he wouldn't see me. "He went into this building here." David studied the drawing and felt his blood run cold. He recognized that building perfectly. It was the commercial complex where Michael had his personal office, separate from the main company. "Are you absolutely sure it was this building?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Sure. I waited hidden until he left. 2 hours later, he looked pretty pleased with himself." David closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Michael, his best friend, his partner, the person he trusted most in the world, had orchestrated his kidnapping. "Mr. Sterling, do you know this building?" Sophia asked, noticing his reaction. "I do," he replied, his voice heavy with deep sadness. "It belongs to someone I considered family." Sophia placed her small hand on his. "I'm sorry. It must hurt when people you love do bad things." David looked at that girl, wise beyond her years, who had lost everything but still found compassion to comfort him in his pain. At that moment, he knew he would do anything to protect her, even if it meant confronting his best friend. The second week after the kidnapping brought a discovery that would completely change the course of events. David had spent the last few days discreetly investigating Michael's activities, trying to understand the extent of the betrayal. But it was Sophia who made the most shocking discovery. "Mr. Sterling," she said one rainy afternoon when he arrived at the hideout with food and new clothes for her, "something very bad happened." The seriousness in her voice immediately alerted him. "What is it, Sophia? Remember that man with the scar I saw talking about you? I saw him again today." David sat down quickly. "Where?" "Near my overpass. He was with another man, and they were talking about me." Her voice became small, almost a whisper. David's blood ran cold. "What did they say?" Sophia opened her notebook to a new page where there were notes written in shaky handwriting. "They said that the girl saw too much and that the boss wants them to solve the girl problem before she talks to anyone." The words hit David like a gut punch. He had put Sophia in danger by going back to his company, by asking questions. Somehow Michael had found out there was a witness. "Sophia, are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" he asked, though he knew she would never lie about something like this. "I'm sure, and there's more." She turned the page, revealing another drawing. "They mentioned where I might be hiding. Mr. Sterling, they know about the overpass." The reality of the situation fell upon David like an avalanche. Sophia was not just in danger, she was a specific target. The same criminals who had kidnapped him were now coming after the only person who had shown him genuine kindness in his life. "We need to get out of here now," he said, standing up abruptly. "Gather your things, everything important. We can't stay here anymore." Sophia began to quickly put her belongings into the shoebox, her mother's photos, her grandmother's necklace, her precious notebook. "Where are we going?" David paused for a moment, realizing he didn't have an answer. He couldn't take her to his home. If Michael was involved, he certainly knew all his addresses. He couldn't trust any hotel, not without clean documents. And he definitely couldn't go to the police without concrete evidence against a respected businessman. I don't know," he admitted, a sense of desperation taking over. "But we'll figure it out together." It was then that Sophia did something he would never expect. She approached and held his hands with her small, firm hands. "Mr. Sterling, you saved me when you gave me hope that there are good people in the world. Now it's my turn to really save you." "Sophia, you're just a child. You can't—" "Yes, I can," she interrupted with determination. "I know things about living hidden that you don't. I know how to move through the city without being seen. I know where to find food and shelter when you don't have money. And most importantly, I know how to find out information that adults don't want us to know." David looked at that extraordinary girl and realized she was right. In 1 week, she had discovered more about the conspiracy against him than he had managed in years, being deceived by people close to him. "What do you propose?" he asked. Sophia gave a determined smile, the first truly confident smile he had seen on her. "That we turn the tables. Instead of running from the bad men, we're going to go after them. We're going to find out everything about what they're doing and why. It's too dangerous." "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice gaining impressive maturity, "they've already decided we're enemies. We can choose to be enemies who hide or enemies who fight. I choose to fight." At that moment, under an overpass where a homeless girl had built a home with hope and determination, David made the most important decision of his life. He would no longer be the passive victim of a conspiracy. With Sophia by his side, he would become the hunter. "All right," he said, his voice firm for the first time since the kidnapping. "Let's hunt the bad men." Sophia nodded with satisfaction. "Now you're talking like someone who really wants to win." In the following 2 weeks, David and Sophia developed a routine he never could have imagined. During the day, they separated. He returned to the company, feigning normalcy while discreetly observing Michael's every move, and she used her urban invisibility skills to follow the criminals and map their activities. At night, they met in different locations across the city, never the same place twice, to share information. Sophia had proven to be a natural spy, capable of moving through the city's shadows like a ghost, observing and noting everything in her increasingly voluminous notebook. "I found out something important today," Sophia said one night, when they met in an abandoned subway station she had found. "The man with the scar met with your partner." David felt his stomach clench. "You saw them together?" "I did, and I heard part of their conversation." Sophia opened her notebook. To the most recent page, they were discussing money, a lot of money. The man with the scar said that the job wasn't complete and that he needed more payment to finish the service. "What service?" David asked, though he dreaded the answer. "To eliminate you completely," Sophia replied with the brutal honesty he had learned to expect from her. "It seems the kidnapping was just the beginning. They wanted you to disappear forever. But something went wrong." David reflected on this. "Perhaps they got scared when they found out you had found me. A missing millionaire can be explained, but a dead millionaire in an area with witnesses, it's too dangerous," Sophia completed. "So now they want to get rid of the witness first." The cold logic of the situation was terrifying, but also revealing. "Sophia, that means Michael didn't just want to scare or rob me. He wanted to take everything that's yours," she said simply. "Your company, your money, your life." During the third week, the discoveries intensified. David began discreetly investigating the company's finances and uncovered irregularities, dating back years. Transfers to shell companies, inflated contracts, subtle but consistent diversions that amounted to millions. "Michael wasn't just planning to eliminate me," he explained to Sophia one night. "He had been stealing for years. The kidnapping was to cover up the financial crimes." Sophia nodded, as if the complexity of the situation was perfectly clear to her. "He needed you to disappear before you discovered the thefts." "Exactly. But now that I survived, he needs to find another way to silence me." It was then that Sophia made a revelation that changed everything. "Mr. Sterling, I found out where they meet to plan the bad stuff." She showed him an address meticulously noted. "It's a warehouse by the docks. They meet every Thursday night." David looked at the address, feeling a mixture of hope and terror. "Sophia, this is too dangerous if we're discovered." "I know, but I also know that if we don't do anything, they'll get us anyway." She closed the notebook and looked him directly in the eyes. "Mr. Sterling, do you trust me?" The question caught him off guard. In 3 weeks, that girl had become the person he trusted most in the world. Completely. "Then let me do what I do best. Let me be invisible and find out exactly what they're planning." David fought against all his protective instincts. The idea of putting Sophia in danger terrified him, but he also knew she was right. She possessed skills he would never have, and without precise information about the criminals' plans, they would always be a step behind. "All right," he said finally, "but with conditions. You don't go in alone. We stay together. And at the first sign of danger, we run." Sophia smiled, a smile that mixed childish determination with adult courage. "Deal. On Thursday we'll uncover all their secrets." At that moment, David realized his life had become something he never could have imagined. An improbable partnership between a betrayed millionaire and a courageous street girl, united against powerful enemies who wanted to destroy them. Thursday arrived charged with tension. David had spent the entire day trying to maintain normalcy at the company, but his nerves were on edge. Every glance from Michael seemed to hide threats. Every whispered conversation among employees sounded like conspiracy. When it was finally time to meet Sophia near the docks, David discovered she had meticulously prepared for the mission. She wore dark clothes that made her almost invisible in the shadows and had tied her hair back practically. "You look like a professional spy," he commented, trying to ease his own tension with humor. "I learned that survival is a full-time profession," she replied seriously. "When you live on the street, you either get good at being invisible or you don't live very long." They approached the warehouse indicated in Sophia's notebook, moving carefully between containers and stacks of goods. The location was isolated, perfect for meetings no one should witness. Faint lights leaked from the dirty windows of the building. "There," Sophia whispered, pointing to a high window. "If we climb that pile of boxes, we can see and hear everything without being seen." David hesitated. "Sophia, if they discover us—" "They won't," she said confidently. "Trust me." They carefully climbed to the strategic position. From there, they had a clear view of the interior of the warehouse, where 5 men were gathered around a makeshift table. David immediately recognized the man with the scar Sophia had described, and his heart pounded when he saw Michael among them. "The problem is, now we have 2 witnesses instead of 1, Michael was saying, his voice carrying the irritation of someone accustomed to having complete control of situations. "The girl can be eliminated easily," the man with the scar replied with a coldness that made David feel nauseous. "Street kids disappear every day. No one asks questions." "What about David?" "More complicated. He's too well known. But we have a plan." Sophia squeezed David's arm, signaling for him to pay special attention to what came next. "We'll frame him for the very crimes you committed," the criminal continued. "We've already planted evidence in his personal account, documents that show he was siphoning money from the company. When he disappears, it'll look like he fled with the stolen money." David felt his world collapse around him. Not only did they want to kill him, but also to destroy his reputation and leave him as a scapegoat for Michael's crimes. "What if someone investigates too deeply?" Michael asked. "We have contacts in the police, investigators who know when to stop asking questions in exchange for the right payment." The man with the scar smiled cruelly. "Your partner will be remembered as a criminal who fooled everyone, including you." The 4th major revelation was unfolding before David's eyes. He couldn't trust the local police, as Michael had corrupted investigators through bribes and blackmail. The very institutions that should protect him were working against him. "When do we do this?" Michael asked. "Tomorrow night. The girl first, then him, quick and clean." Sophia began to tremble beside David, but not from fear, from rage. Those men were planning their deaths as if they were items on a shopping list. "We need more evidence," she whispered in his ear. "We need to record this." But at the exact moment David reached for his phone in his pocket, a rotten board gave way under his feet. The noise was small, but in the relative silence of the warehouse, it sounded like a gunshot. All the men downstairs stopped talking and looked in the direction of the noise. "What was that?" one of them asked. David and Sophia froze, trying to become one with the shadows. For a few eternal seconds, no one moved. Then, the man with the scar gestured to the others. "Go check outside. Might be some homeless person snooping around." David saw 2 men heading for the warehouse exit. In a matter of minutes, they would be surrounded. "Sophia," he whispered desperately, "we need to get out of here now." But when he turned to her, he discovered something that chilled him to the bone. Sophia was no longer by his side. In the gloom of the warehouse, he heard a childish voice, clear and defiant. "Looking for me." the terror David felt upon hearing Sophia's voice echoing inside the warehouse was unlike any fear he had ever experienced. It wasn't fear for his own life, but the absolute despair of knowing he had failed to protect the only person who truly mattered to him. Well, said the man with the scar, his voice laden with cruel satisfaction. Looks like our little witness decided to turn herself in. David crawled to the edge of the makeshift platform and saw Sophia in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by the 5 men. She looked tiny among them, but her posture was upright and defiant. Even captured, she didn't show the fear any normal child would feel. "Where's your millionaire friend?" Michael asked, approaching her. "Far from here," Sophia replied firmly. "Where you'll never find him." David immediately realized what she had done. Sophia had deliberately given herself up to give him time to escape. She was willing to sacrifice her own life to save him, just as she had done that first night in the alley when she offered her jacket. "You're brave, little girl," said the man with the scar, "but also very foolish. You have no idea what you're facing." "Yes, I do," Sophia retorted, lifting her chin. "I'm facing weak men who only know how to attack children and helpless people. My mom taught me that a coward is always a coward, no matter how many friends he brings to help." Sophia's fearless response enraged the criminals, but it also revealed something that made David's heart clench even more. In the back pocket of her pants, he could see a small part of her notebook. She had managed to keep her notes hidden. "Where are your notes about us?" Michael asked, who had also noticed the bulge in her pocket. "I burned everything," Sophia lied convincingly. "I'm not stupid enough to walk around with evidence." But David knew Sophia too well to believe that lie. She would never destroy her notebook. It was her most precious possession, her only way to make sense of the chaotic world around her. She was lying to protect the evidence they had collected together. "Frisk her," the man with the scar ordered. When they found the notebook, Sophia's expression changed for the first time. David saw tears form in her eyes, not from fear, but from frustration at having failed to protect her treasure of information. "Interesting," Michael said, flipping through the pages. "The girl knows more about our operations than we imagined." "She heard too much, saw too much," the criminal agreed. "This confirms we can't leave her alive." It was then that Sophia did something extraordinary. Looking directly to where she knew David was hiding, she blinked 3 times, a code they had developed during their weeks of partnership to indicate "execute emergency plan." David understood immediately. Sophia wanted him to flee, to survive, to find a way to expose those men even without her. She was willing to die so that justice could be served. "You can hurt me," Sophia said, her voice gaining a strength that echoed through the warehouse walls. "But you can't erase the truth, and you can't kill the goodness that exists in the world." "How dramatic," Michael scoffed. "No one will remember you, little girl. Kids like you disappear every day." "Someone will remember," Sophia replied with absolute conviction. "Good people always remember other good people, and one day you'll pay for everything you've done." David knew he had to act. He couldn't simply run away and let Sophia die, but he also knew that a hasty action would result in both their deaths. He needed to be smart, use the only advantage he had. They still didn't know exactly where he was. Silently, he began to move through the structure of the warehouse, looking for a way to create a distraction that would allow him to free Sophia. His phone had low battery, but perhaps it would be enough for one crucial call. Downstairs, Sophia continued to confront her captors with a courage that broke David's heart. "Do you know the difference between you and people like my Mr. Sterling?" she asked. You only know how to destroy. He knows how to build good things. And at that moment, David knew exactly what to do. As he moved silently through the warehouse structure, David overheard a conversation that would completely change his understanding of the entire situation. One of the criminals was talking on the phone, and his words made David's blood run cold. "Yes, we found his daughter." "No, she doesn't know yet. Are you sure her father found out about the scheme?" David stopped breathing. "Whose daughter? Whose father were they talking about?" "Yeah, I know you ordered him eliminated back then, but the girl survived." "No, she doesn't suspect anything. Thinks she's an orphan." The first major twist was revealing itself before David's eyes. Sophia wasn't just a random homeless girl. There was something much more complex in her story. "Look, Michael," the criminal continued, "are you sure you want to eliminate John's daughter? She's just a kid." John. David knew only one John who had worked for the company, John Miller, a meticulous accountant who had abruptly resigned 6 months ago, claiming family health issues. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together terrifyingly. John had discovered the fund diversion scheme and had been silenced because of it. Michael had destroyed his family, indirectly causing the death of his sick wife who couldn't afford expensive medicine. The girl isn't just a casual witness, David whispered to himself, the magnitude of the situation hitting him like an avalanche. She's the daughter of a man who was killed for discovering the truth. Downstairs, Sophia continued to be interrogated, completely unaware that she was face to face with her father's murderers. "Your mother died of an illness, didn't she?" Michael asked with false sympathy. "How sad. I bet you didn't have money. And for expensive treatments." Sophia nodded, tears finally streaming down her face as she remembered the loss. "And your father? You said you never met him." "My mom said he was a good man, but he had to leave before I was born," Sophia repeated. The same story she had told David. "Lie," Michael said cruelly. "Your father didn't leave. Your father was John Miller, and he worked for me." The shock on Sophia's face was visible even from where David was hiding. You knew my father?" "I knew him, and I ordered him killed," Michael replied with cruel satisfaction. "He discovered things he shouldn't have discovered, just like you." The second major twist was completing. Sophia was not only the daughter of a former company employee who was silenced after discovering the corruption scheme, but her family had been destroyed by the same man who was now pursuing both of them. "I killed my father." Sophia's voice was small, broken. "I ordered it. He was a problem just like you've become." Michael approached her. "The difference is you'll meet the same end he did." David saw Sophia emotionally break down for the first time since he had met her. The strong, courageous girl who had faced life on the streets with determination finally broke upon discovering that the men who had destroyed her family were right there, in front of her. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why did you hurt my family? We never did anything wrong to anyone." "Because your father was just like you, too curious for his own good," replied the man with the scar. "And now you two are going to be reunited." But it was then that David heard something that made him realize the situation was even worse than he imagined. Michael was on the phone again. "Yes, prepare the documents." "No, we want it to look like David discovered everything and fled with the money. Plant the evidence in his account first thing tomorrow morning, and make sure our version gets to the press before anyone can question." The third major twist revealed itself in all its extent. Michael not only wanted to eliminate him and Sophia, but had prepared a complete narrative where David would be seen as the true criminal. Using forged documents and bought witnesses, he would completely invert the situation, making the true victim appear guilty. David understood that it wasn't just about his life or Sophia's life. It was about justice for John Miller, for his wife who died without proper treatment, and for all the other victims of Michael's criminal scheme. With the phone in his hand, he made the most important decision of his life. He would not run. He would not hide. It was time to turn the hunted into the hunter. David knew he had only one chance. With the phone in his hand, he dialed the number he had memorized during his weeks of investigation. An investigative journalist who had tried to interview him months ago about corporate malfeasance. "Marcus Rivers, the City Tribune," answered the sleepy voice. "Marcus, it's David Sterling. I know it's late, but I have the biggest corruption story you've ever seen. And it's happening right now, live." "David? The businessman? I thought you'd disappeared." "That's part of the story. Listen closely and keep this line open. I'm going to transmit confessions of crimes that will bring down an entire corruption scheme." Without waiting for a response, David activated the phone's speakerphone and began to move to a position where he could clearly capture the voices from the warehouse. Downstairs, Michael continued to reveal details of his crimes to Sophia as if he wanted her to fully understand the power he had wielded over her family before eliminating her. "Your father discovered I was siphoning money for years," he was saying, his voice filled with arrogance. $3 million a year transferred to offshore accounts through shell companies I created." David positioned the phone so that every word was clearly captured by the call with the journalist. "When John came to confront me with the evidence," Michael continued, "I knew he had to disappear. I had the same men who are here today eliminate him. A very convincing car accident." Sophia quietly sobbed, but David noticed she was paying attention to every detail, even amidst the emotional pain. "And his wife died because you stole the money that could have saved her," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength again. "Unavoidable collateral damage," Michael replied coldly. "Business is business." It was then that David decided to reveal his presence. He stepped out of the shadows and slowly descended to the warehouse floor, keeping his phone hidden but active. "Michael," he said, his voice echoing through the space. 23 years of friendship, and I never knew who you really were." All the men turned, surprised by his appearance. Sophia looked at him with a mix of relief and terror. "David! How did you find us?" Michael tried to look surprised, but there was something calculating in his eyes. "The same way I found out about the fund diversion, about the shell companies, about John Miller's death." David approached slowly. "Sophia helped me see the truth that was right in front of me for years." "You have no proof of anything," Michael said, regaining his arrogance. "I have the entire conversation you just had," David retorted, showing his phone. "Broadcast live to an investigative journalist. Your confessions about the murders, the embezzlements, everything." Panic instantly settled on Michael's face. You wouldn't do that." "Too late. And I'm not the only one listening." David looked at Sophia. "Tell them what you really did with your notes, Sophia." Sophia, understanding immediately, wiped away her tears and smiled for the first time since her capture. "I didn't burn anything. I made copies of everything and sent them to 3 different addresses. If anything happened to me, the evidence would be automatically delivered to the authorities." It was a lie, but a brilliant one that David immediately supported, "including to the FBI, who aren't under the influence of your local contacts," he added. "That's impossible," stammered the man with the scar. "A child wouldn't have the resources to—" "A child who lived on the streets learns to be smarter than complacent adults," Sophia said proudly. "And a child whose father was murdered learns to prepare for justice." At that moment, the sound of sirens began to approach. David had asked the journalist to contact federal authorities, and they were arriving. "It's over, Michael," David said. "You've lost." But Michael, cornered and desperate, pulled a gun. "If I go down, you're coming with me." The tension in the warehouse was at its peak as Michael pointed the gun alternately at David and Sophia. The sound of the sirens was getting closer, but still not close enough to guarantee immediate safety. "You ruined everything," Michael said, his voice trembling between rage and desperation. "Years of planning, years building this empire, and a street kid and a naive fool are going to destroy it all." "We didn't destroy anything," Sophia retorted with a courage that made David proud. "You chose to hurt innocent people. You killed my father. And now I'll finish what he left behind," Michael growled. But it was then that Sophia's cunning, developed over months of living on the streets, fully revealed itself. As she spoke, she had managed to subtly loosen the ropes binding her wrists, a skill she had learned observing street magicians during her days of panhandling. At the exact moment Michael decided to pull the trigger, Sophia lunged to the side and activated a device David hadn't noticed before, a small recorder she had hidden in her clothes. "FBI! Drop your weapons!" The agents' voices echoed through the warehouse as they burst through the doors. Michael, confused and in a panic, hesitated long enough for David to completely free Sophia from the remaining ropes. "He confessed everything," Sophia shouted to the federal agents. "He confessed to killing my father, to stealing millions from the company, everything." The journalist, Marcus Rivers, entered right behind the agents, accompanied by a TV crew. The live broadcast had become a national event, with thousands of people following the unfolding events in real time. "David Sterling," said the lead agent, "we need your testimony regarding the crimes we just witnessed." "With pleasure," David replied, embracing Sophia protectively. "But first, I want you to meet the real hero of this story. Sophia Miller, daughter of John Miller, a man of integrity who died defending the truth." Sophia looked at him with tears in her eyes, but for the first time they were tears of relief and gratitude, not pain. In the weeks that followed, the story dominated headlines across the nation. Michael and his accomplices were arrested, charged with murder, extortion, money laundering, and corruption. Investigations revealed that the criminal scheme extended far beyond David's company, involving politicians, other businessmen, and a network of corruption that had operated for years. David fully regained control of his company, and the diverted funds were partially recovered and used to compensate the families of the criminal scheme's victims. But the most significant change happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, 5 weeks after that first freezing night in the alley. "Sophia Maria Miller," the judge solemnly stated, "would you like to officially become David Sterling's daughter?" Sophia, wearing a blue dress she had specially chosen for the occasion, held David's hand firmly. "Yes, Your Honor. He saved me when I needed it most." "Actually," David gently interrupted, "she saved me, in every possible way." The judge smiled. "Therefore, by this act, I declare the adoption official. David, you are now legally Sophia's father, and Sophia, you now have a family forever." As they left the courthouse, Sophia held in one hand the jacket she had offered David that first night. He had insisted on returning it to her as a symbol of where it all began. In her other hand, she held an envelope with new photos, the new family's first official photo shoot. "Dad," Sophia said, the words sounding natural and loving, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, sweetheart." "That night in the alley, when I offered you my jacket, I knew you were different." "How did you know?" Sophia smiled, the same wise smile that had captivated David from day one. "Because even hurt and scared, you worried more about me than about yourself. People like that are rare, and people like that deserve to be saved." David hugged his daughter, realizing he had found much more than justice. He had found the true meaning of family. A year after that freezing Thursday night that changed their lives forever, David and Sophia stood on the same street where they first met, but this time they weren't running or hiding. They were inaugurating the John Miller Outreach and Shelter, an institution dedicated to vulnerable children. "Daddy, do you think my biological father would be proud?" Sophia, now 9 years old, asked, wearing a small blazer that matched David's. She had insisted on wearing business attire for the inauguration, saying she wanted to look professional like Daddy. "I'm sure he would," David replied, adjusting her tie with the affection that had become natural. "He gave his life to protect the truth, and you used that truth to save many other people." The center occupied a renovated building that had previously housed Michael's shell companies. The irony of the transformation was not lost on anyone. Where a corruption scheme once operated, hope and protection now existed for the most vulnerable. Sophia had become much more than a daughter to David. She was his confidant, his inspiration, and often his conscience. Despite attending the best school in the city and having access to everything money could buy, she maintained the simplicity and wisdom that had been born from her street experience. "Remember my notebook of notes?" Sophia asked as they walked towards the stage set up for the ceremony. "Of course, how could I forget? It saved our lives." Now I use the same technique to teach the kids here at the center. They learn to observe, to take notes, to protect themselves. Sophia pointed to a group of children chatting animatedly near the entrance. And more importantly, they learn that information is power, but power is only useful when it's used to help. The dedication ceremony attracted hundreds of people, including officials, journalists, and most importantly, dozens of families from the local community. Marcus Rivers, the journalist who had helped expose the criminal scheme, was covering the event for a TV special on social transformation. "A year ago," David said in his inaugural speech, "I thought I knew the value of money and power, but a courageous girl taught me that true wealth lies in the courage to do what's right, even when it costs us everything." Sophia, who had insisted on speaking too, approached the microphone. Despite her young age, her presence on stage was natural and confident. "This center isn't just for homeless kids," she said, her clear voice reaching the entire audience. "It's for any child who needs to learn that they have worth, that they have rights, and that they deserve to be protected. Because every child deserves to have someone who believes in them." After the ceremony, David and Sophia paid a special visit to the place where it all began, the alley where she had offered her jacket to a stranger in despair. The location now had proper lighting and was regularly patrolled, symbolizing how places of despair can be transformed into points of hope. "You know what I like most about this whole story?" Sophia asked, swinging her legs as she sat on the small bench they had installed there as a memorial. "What?" "That it proves that heroes can be any age, any size, any background. They just need to choose to do good when the situation calls for it." David looked at his extraordinary daughter and realized she was right. The hero of the story wasn't him, with all his money and influence. It was an 8-year-old girl who had chosen to share her jacket with a stranger on a cold night. The jacket that symbolized the first act of kindness was now framed in the center's office, with a plaque that read, "Generosity is not measured by the size of the gift, but by the size of the giver's sacrifice." As they walked back home, Sophia took David's hand and said, "Dad, thank you for choosing me as your daughter." "Sophia," he replied, "you chose me first, and it was the best choice anyone has ever made for me." And so, a story that began with fear and betrayal ended with love and hope, proving that sometimes our greatest salvations come from where we least